Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel where the goal is to play every single game that every character in Super Smash Bros. Is from, starting from the oldest to the newest. In my last outing, I tackled Donkey Kong in his arcade days, going over his 3 mainline games, and talking a little about an 80s cartoon. If you haven't watched that video, give it a watch. I was actually really proud of my editing in that one. But moving forward in the Donkey Kong timeline, let's talk about what happened after the end of the arcades. Well, not the end of the arcade, but you know what I mean. After the arcade days, Donkey Kong's popularity had opened the floodgates for Nintendo to expand into the West, bringing along their new home console, the Famicom, rebranded in America to the NES or the Nintendo Entertainment System.
The facts and the he like microwave tried to react. He was killing with a lot of back air. Oh my gosh!
After Donkey Kong 3, Shigeru Miyamoto wanted to shift his focus over to the protagonist of Donkey Kong, Jumpman. He renamed Mario and created Super Mario. And in doing so, he left our giant ape friend behind, left to rot in his arcade cabinet. Don't get me wrong, he did have arcade ports onto the NES, but it's not the same as a full-on game like Mario had going on. Mario had Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3, and Donkey Kong couldn't even get a 1. To be honest, at this time, Miyamoto was busy creating some of the biggest games of all time and having influence over a series of others. One day I would like to make a video on Miyamoto exclusively because the man just did so much for gaming. He may not be a creator of Smash, but a lot of his characters have made it to that roster. Since Miyamoto, however, was not working on Donkey Kong, that meant no one else was working on him either. And we never got a fresh Donkey Kong game on the NES. No, Miyamoto would not return to Donkey Kong. So it was up to someone else to bring Donkey Kong to a new decade. And that would come from a British game company named Rare. But how did Rare get their hands on Donkey Kong? Nintendo isn't really known for handing out their characters to anyone, so what made them choose Rare? So in this video, I want to talk about not just Donkey Kong Country, but also how it came to be. So let's talk about the history of Rare and how we got here. Rare's journey starts all the way back in 1982 with a pair of British video game developers named Tim and Chris Stamper. Together with Chris designing and Tim coding, the two started making games. The first one being called Jetpack, a shooter/collector where you fight aliens. It was released in 1983 for the ZX Spectrum and VIC-20, and then for the BBC Micro in 1984. They released this game under the pseudonym Ultimate Play of the Game. It went on to win the Golden Joystick Awards Game of the Year in 1983. And if you're wondering, the ZX Spectrum and VIC-20 and the BBC Micro, I had never heard of any of these before I started making this video. So as a brief overview if you're interested, the ZX Spectrum was a personal computer that could also play video games. It was a very popular console in the UK, selling over 5 million units. It did make its way over to the United States at one point, but yeah, it's mostly popular and known in the United Kingdom. The VIC-20 was also a personal computer, and it was one of the first to sell over 1 million units. And from what I've read, it was more like the inexpensive computer that anybody could get. And the BBC Micro, also known as the BBC Microcomputer System, was also a personal computer, yes, but it focused mainly on educational things. It was a part of the BBC's Computer Literacy Project. It was meant to showcase educational BBC programs such as Computer Programme, Making the Most of the Micro and Computers in Control, and Micro Live. So yeah, I just figured I'd share that little tad bit of information with you, so let's get back to talking about Rare. With Jetpack, over the next 2 years, Ultimate Play of the Game would become top game developers in the UK. They had begun developing a style of their own that made them stand out for the rest of the competition that existed at the time. They had created games like Psst, Trans Am, Saber Wolf, and even a sequel to Jetpack called Lunar Jetman. Ultimate Play of the Game was doing a great job of making a name for themselves. The Stamper brothers were working 18-hour days, 7 days a week. They believed that a part-time employee resulted in a part-time game. And if they consider that part-time, then I guess I just don't work at all, because I definitely don't work those kind of hours. They only took 2 days off in 3 years, both were Christmas mornings. In this draining work environment, they even started working with isometric 3D games, such as creating Saberman and Knight's Lore. The brothers were riding high and on a tear with Ultimate Play of the Game, which makes it surprising that the brothers sold the Ultimate brand to a British game publisher, US Gold, and left the Spectrum behind The brothers wanted to shift their focus on a new product coming out in Japan, the Nintendo Famicom. They viewed the Spectrum as a dead end and saw the future in Nintendo's home console. Which I guess they were right, because I've never heard of a Spectrum, but I definitely heard of a Nintendo before. I guess maybe they were onto something, right? Let me know down in the comments if you're an active Spectrum enjoyer. I want to hear from you. Before Nintendo even had a chance to release the NES, the brothers had gotten their hands on a Famicom and started to break the code on every game they could down. They had formed a subdivision in Ashby Computers and Graphics Ltd. To do this, they had a special code name, Rare. After shining away the name Ultimate Play of the game, the Stamper brothers took some software to Kyoto, Japan, and showcased it to Nintendo to show them just how good they really are. At this time, Western companies never approached Nintendo like this. The Stamper brothers had reverse engineered Nintendo's hardware, built software for that hardware, and traveled to Kyoto just to prove what they could do. Nintendo was so impressed that they had granted Rare one of the rarest opportunities, see what I did there, and gave them official access to Nintendo's hardware and publishing relationship that would allow Rare to produce games for the Nintendo Entertainment System. The brothers were given a chance to basically release as many games as they could within a year, and around this time they had made their new name official, Rare. They got started creating so many games, but what's funny is that in the UK, the NES was not very popular at the time. Well, not as much as the previous console, the Spectrum, so a lot of their countrymen went from seeing what they were putting out to not playing any of their games. Rare got started making bigger games for the NES, even officially licensed games, like an NES game for A Nightmare on Elm Street and Hollywood Squares. Also creating popular ports of games like Marble Madness, Narc, and Sid Meier's Pirates. They had also made Game Boy games, which were not always original games, but it showed how much Nintendo was turning to them. They ended up making some successful games for the NES, including Wizards and Warriors, a third Jetman called Solar Jumpman, Hunting for the Golden Warship, but most notably, their most popular game at the time, and the one I had heard of before this, was Battletoads. Battletoads would become a popular game under Rare, because it showcased Rare wasn't just good at adapting existing properties, they could also build their own franchise characters. At this time, however, a lot of their work was less about their creativity and more about their consistency. It didn't give them notoriety, but it got them more exposure beyond England. Rare went on to produce about 60 games for the NES and the Game Boy from 1985 to 1990. They also did a handful of games for the Sega Genesis and the Game Gear. The pace they were on was crazy, resulting in a new game almost every month. Rare didn't really mind doing work on things like ports or what's considered grunt work because it let them push the console's hardware as much as they could, something that they would become known for years down the road. Then Nintendo decided that they needed an upgrade. They needed the Nintendo to become Super. The Super Famicom would release November 21st in 1990. Then North America would get the Super Nintendo August 23rd, 1991, and then Europe and Australia got it in April 11th, 1992. With this new console, the brothers at the time had to restart learning the new software to see what they could do with Nintendo going Super. They pulled back the number of the games they were creating and focused more on the quality, giving them a chance to learn the new console, only creating a few games including Battletoads, which also had a crossover with Double Dragon. Rare took the large portion of money they made from all the games they created for the NES and bought the Silicon Graphics workstation. Doing this bumped them up to the most technologically advanced game creators in not only the UK, but most of the world. The Silicon Graphics, aka the SGI, were high-performance Unix-based systems that for Rare in the context of gaming could turn 3D rendered models into 2D sprites that could work on the Super Nintendo console. These SGI workstations weren't cheap either. Rare reportedly invested millions of dollars into this technology, making it one of the biggest risks the company had ever taken. But they believed this technology represented the future of game development. The Stamper brothers took this SGI and created a game as a full CGI render, creating a boxing game to showcase its potential. When Nintendo saw this showcase, they bought 25% of Rare's stake, even eventually buying 49%. See, around this time, Nintendo saw this as a big break when it came to the aesthetic of their games. They had seen what Sega had done with the Aladdin game, and yes, I mean Aladdin as in the Disney character, because they had actually had artists from the movie come on to help make art for the game, which is really cool. With Nintendo buying so much of Rare, they felt more comfortable with letting Rare into their rogues gallery of characters. Nintendo basically said, "Who do you want? Stanley the Bugman? Maybe Kid Icarus? No. Rare said they had wanted Donkey Kong. And honestly, Donkey Kong was a perfect choice. Donkey Kong at this point had been dormant for years. So Rare was being handed one of Nintendo's most recognizable characters while still having enough creative freedom to reinvent him almost from scratch. It would be a great deal for both parties. Rare was taking all of the knowledge they had gained, developing so many games for Nintendo that they put into work bringing Donkey Kong back from the dead. Rare developed a team of 12 people, which was their biggest at the time, and began work in 1993. Nintendo kept a close eye on them as this was not just any game, we were talking about Donkey Kong here. I mean, we're not talking about this. We're not talking about this. We're talking about this. They sent an early demo to Japan where it was receiving mixed reviews. Gunpei Yokoi, who was the creator of Game & Watch and also the Game Boy, was not a fan of the game's 3D appearance. But Shigeru Miyamoto was supportive of the project and encouraged Rare in their new direction. Nintendo codenamed the game Country because of Rare's base at the time, TWY Cross. Or however you pronounce that, I don't know. Rare was taking great inspiration from Super Mario, primarily Super Mario Bros. 3, for the level design, bringing Donkey Kong over to a platformer just like Miyamoto had done with Mario. Creating maps that would be challenging, but a skilled, experienced player could flow through the worlds with ease, rewarding replayability. The idea of speedrunning wasn't really as popular as it would become today, but this game was made with the idea of it in mind. They designed the levels using post-it notes as setup pieces to come up with variations to each map. Rare wanted to make the barrel a primary game feature as an ode to Donkey Kong's origins. Kevin Bayliss was in charge of the redesign of Donkey Kong's solo game debut on the Super Nintendo. He wanted to create a more animated design, one that could pound his chest and have more expression. Miyamoto stepped in and with his genius suggested that Donkey Kong wear a tie. Now that may sound simple, but when you look at Donkey Kong and you go from this to this, genius. Rare was given free range on expanding new characters as there was no established universe for Donkey Kong at this time. They wanted to experiment with health at the time, making your health another character. This other character would be inspired by a spider monkey.
Chip, I'm gonna come at you like a spider monkey.
Like a spider monkey!
And be Rare's attempt at modernizing Donkey Kong Jr. But Nintendo decided that the redesign Rare approached them with was too far from Jr.'s original appearance, and they asked Rare to just rename the character, which results in the debut of another Smash character, Diddy Kong. The idea of the two characters would be that Donkey Kong is heavy and strong, while Diddy Kong is fast and agile. One funny story I had read about the development of the game was that Rare staff spent a lot of time at the zoo trying to use gorillas as a reference, but said it was a complete waste of time as they didn't think their movements were suitable for the game. Which is funny because I really don't know what they were expecting from real-life gorillas. None of them wear ties. No wonder it was a waste of time. Mark Betteridge provided the iconic voice for Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong. And with this new Donkey Kong, Rare had decided to create another character named Cranky Kong. Cranky Kong is supposed to be the original Donkey Kong, while this new Donkey Kong was the one who was ready for the next generation. This is most apparent in the opening of Donkey Kong Country, where Cranky Kong is positioned at the top of the steel beams from the original Donkey Kong while playing a record of the original music, until the new and improved Donkey Kong knocks him off and a revamped version of the original song begins to play. Out with the old and in with the new. When developing these new characters, i.e. the Donkey Kong family, they wanted to base all models off of Donkey Kong so it reflected them as family. So that's how we also end up with other members of the family like Candy and Funky Kong, and much more to come down the road. Originally, Rare wanted to use Super Mario character Wario as the main antagonist who steals all of Donkey Kong's bananas. Nintendo asked them, however, to please stick to original characters. They went back to the drawing board and decided to use the Kremlings from a cancelled Monkey Island style game called Johnny Blastoff and the Kremling Armada. As for the main antagonist, Rare wanted to create someone comedic yet menacing, parodying a monarch with his crown, cape, and big gold belly, and cruel stereotypes. The design was created by Greg Mayles, and the leader of the Kremlings was born, King K. Rool. That's 2 Smash debuts in one video. Whew! I do wonder how different the franchise would be if Wario took over as the main antagonist. I think they could have made it work, but then I don't see how you could have got the pirate theming to work as well. Then again, I love Wario and he can do no wrong in my eyes, so. Everything Rare needed was finally in place. They didn't just make a Donkey Kong game, they had rebuilt Donkey Kong from the ground up, giving him a distinct personality, a supporting cast, his own enemies, animal companions who I'll get into later, and a whole world built around him. And if you think about it, this design that they had created here would define Donkey Kong for the next 30 years. Only with the release of Donkey Kong Bonanza has he even seen a different design. It's amazing to see how much of what people associate with Donkey Kong today actually originated from this game. Everything was in place. Donkey Kong had a new look, a family, a new antagonist, friends, level akin design to Super Mario, and were all powered by high-end technology, breaking down 3D rendered models into 2D sprites. So how did it do? As you can probably guess, the game went on to become a massive hit, becoming the third best-selling game on the Super Nintendo with over 9.3 million copies sold worldwide, and successfully reinvented Donkey Kong's image for a new generation. The final results of the visuals stand out right away, as Donkey Kong Country is leagues ahead of its contemporaries. Here's some other games that came out in 1994, and you can see they were pushing the Super Nintendo far past what anyone thought possible at the time. The game features around 40 levels laid out on a map where you can definitely see the Super Mario 3 influence. The game successfully transformed Donkey Kong into a protagonist and a platformer, and also created an iconic sidekick in Diddy Kong. Followed behind by one of the best soundtracks in gaming history, created mostly by David Wise with contributions from Robin Beanland and Evelyn Fisher. From the great beats that carry you through the jungle stages to the mellow vibes created in the water levels, they nailed the atmosphere of each stage. Donkey Kong doesn't just jump on his enemies in this game either. He and Diddy both have an attack move that were recreated in Smash Bros. As both characters' dash attacks. Besides the Smash 64, I don't really know what they were doing with that one. Although it kinda looks like Charizard's in Ultimate, if you ask me. Even the way the characters stand is reminiscent of Smash with their idle animations. Throughout the stages, you fight a wide variety of Kremlings, including ones that can jump really high, ones that are indestructible but play a game of red light green light, and the ones that only Donkey Kong can kill. Throughout the game, you can tag back and forth between Donkey and Diddy Kong, which is a really nice feature, and it lets you use Donkey Kong's power for bigger enemies and Diddy's speed to get through the levels faster. Diddy's size helps too, with him being smaller, it's easier to dodge enemies. Honestly, most of the game it's better to beat Diddy Kong. He just feels better to go through the levels with. I can see how he became so popular. Popular enough to become the main character of the next game, so. Helping our two protagonists along the way are the animal buddies. The first one you meet is Rambi the Rhino. Rambi the Rhino can plow through enemies and break down walls to reveal secret parts of stages. I think he's supposed to be like the main animal buddy because not only is he the first one you're introduced to, but he's also in the opening screen of Donkey Kong Land, which I'll get to later. He is also an interactive attraction at the Universal Studios theme park. If you ever make your way over to Nintendo World in Donkey Kong Land, you can hit the drums to make Rambi the Rhino appear. And Gardy the Swordfish, who lets you go through underwater enemies which you typically have to avoid, helping you get through the world easier. In the underwater worlds, Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong can't do any attacks, so it's nice to be able to ride Gardy and plow through all the enemies. Winky the Frog, who lets you hop really high, who I also think is quite adorable with his big eyes. Espresso the Ostrich, who lets you glide across the stage. He's also so tall he can kind of just walk over some enemies, rocking some nice kicks too. Then finally, making his debut, but not playing as important of a role as which he would in Donkey Kong Country 2, Squawks the Parrot. Rare wanted to make the barrel a key point in the game as an ode to Donkey Kong's origins, and they did in a big way. Making it the main way to get help with Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong, the ability to jump through barrels and blast to different parts of the stages, sometimes chaining multiple to fly through the stage fast. The barrel to me feels like it became to Donkey Kong what the warp pipe is to Mario. Both are just so synonymous with each character. It is cool to see how the design of the Kremlings became expanded upon from the original designs from Monkey Island, and how there's so many different types of Kremlings included in the final version of what was created in Donkey Kong Jr. with the Claptrap. Honestly, my favorite thing about a lot of the enemies is the sounds they make when they die. I first started playing the game, I didn't expect the yell that the Kremlings would make when they died. It actually genuinely made me laugh when I heard it. It just adds a nice little bit of humor to an already funny game. Throughout the levels, there are a lot of collectibles, something that Rare would become synonymous with in their future creations. Throughout the levels, there are 1-up balloons, K-O-N-G for spelling Kong, bananas, and a lot more. This game does challenge you to collect everything though. When you go to save with Candy Kong at her spots, there will be a percentage next to your save file, showing just how much of the game you've actually beaten, giving you a visual reward for taking on the time to go back and find everything. Or you're just an ultra giga chad like me and didn't miss anything. Nah, I'm just kidding, I missed a lot of stuff. The quickest way to go back to old stages is you go to the Funky Kong part of the map and take his plane back to any stage you've already beaten. As you make your way through each map, you are met with a boss at the end, which is pretty common in a lot of games, but to me what was surprising is that you fight them all in banana caves. To me, this just shows how crazy Donkey Kong's stockpile is, to where there was enough for every boss but K. Rool to have a full cave of them. Most of the bosses in this game are pretty straightforward, you just have to bounce on their head enough times. Besides Queen Bee, who you actually have to hit with a barrel, using that cargo throw that makes my boy so infamous in Smash. I do like that 2 boss fights in this game, you have to fight them and then you gotta fight their dad. You've got Master Necky, and then you got Master Necky Sr. Then there's very naughty, but then there's really naughty. It felt like the equivalent of when my niece used to say, "I'll tell my dad on you," or like passing your controller to your older brother. And then all that's left is Dum Drum. And with him, he just kind of shakes himself up and drops enemies like playing with monkeys in a barrel. He was the weakest boss fight of them all in my opinion. My favorite boss battle though definitely has to be with King K. Rool himself. With King K. Rool, you fight him on his fancy pirate boat where he throws his crown at you and plows through you to pick it up, reminiscent of his side B in Smash Ultimate. My favorite thing about this boss battle though is that they hit you with a fake ending. King K. Rool goes down and the game leads you to believe that you've done enough, only for him to jump back up and keep throwing his crown. He actually starts to jump around when he's running back and forth to get his crown. For me, this jumping made the boss fight much harder, and this is where I died multiple times. With this intangible jump, you could say it's reminiscent of his Nair. And for those of you who don't play Smash who just stumbled across this video, that's his neutral area in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. He just puts the big belly out there. Once you finally bounce on his head enough times, he goes down for the count, and the day is saved by Donkey and Diddy Kong. I mentioned future Smash moves to be in here already, but there is quite a bit of animations that make a return in Smash from this game, so I figured I would make a little compilation of them all and put the moves side by side with the animations. This game is amazing and has a lot of personality. With the facial expressions of the characters, the sound effects enemies make when they die, all their facial expressions, plus Cranky Kong being cranky while breaking the 4th wall, the game just gets everything right. If you've never played this game before, I highly recommend it. You should give it a shot. It's easier than ever to get access to it too on modern consoles with the Super Nintendo Classic on the Switch and Switch 2. I rewrote this part of the video many times. It is honestly the main reason it took me so long to find the best way to structure this video. I like to break it down how a game came to be, but in the case of Donkey Kong and Rare, they shaped the future of Donkey Kong for years to come here, and their success with Donkey Kong would lead them to sequels, as well as their own original IPs becoming staples on Nintendo consoles, including one in particular who would also make their way over to Smash. Anyways, I hope you're liking the video so far. Let me get back to it. And I've been told saying this really helps videos, so if you could like and subscribe, I'd appreciate it. I'm not gonna do that all the time though, because these videos are mostly just for fun. And I've always personally wanted to go back and play every single game that every character in Smash is from. Alright, now let's really get back into it. Donkey Kong Country also had some handheld ports, one to the Game Boy Color and one to the Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Color one does a good job of porting Donkey Kong Country over from the peak of 16-bit to the weaker Game Boy Color, Instead of Diddy running alongside Donkey Kong, you actually have a little barrel icon in the corner to show that he's ready to go once Donkey Kong gets hit, and vice versa. You can still switch back and forth, tagging one another in and out, which I thought was nice. Also, instead of riding the animal buddies as you do in the Super Nintendo, you transform into them. It was probably just the best way to not override the console. It honestly does a good job of keeping the animation and the feel of the game without losing too much, other than some visual aesthetics. I appreciate though that when you get to Cranky Kong, he breaks the fourth wall again, mentioning you can't be good with the visuals and sounds of a Game & Watch. Candy Kong makes her way over to the Game Boy Color, but instead of being where you save the game, and now she hosts a spot for challenges. It's a pretty solid way to get the Donkey Kong Country experience on the go, and shows Rare's cool ability to simplify the game while keeping the feel alive. Donkey Kong Country on the Game Boy Advance, however, actually adds cutscenes to the game to give it more of a story context. It also looks and feels closer to the original Super Nintendo release. The way they did the background created a really nice contrast between the characters and the stages. You can even ride the animal buddies again. Cranky even shows up after boss fights now and chimes in. I do like that they added him in here so he can have his 2 cents on things. It is an interesting port though, because Rare had a chance to go back and add or change anything they wanted to, seeing as this game came out years after the fact. In this game, instead of saving a Candy Kong, you can actually press start on the map and save there. You can also see another new feature, the snapshots. Snapshots were a new thing added to this game. They're spread out randomly throughout the stages, and you can also get them by completing challenges. Candy Kong is a challenge space just like in the Game Boy Color version, but this time, she challenges you to a dance. You must hit the correct inputs when they appear on the screen to follow along to her dance moves to earn a snapshot. And in this game, not only does Funky Kong let you go back to different levels, he also has a new fishing minigame. He will give you a challenge like collect 10 of these red fish or something. Then you move back and forth riding in guard A and try to hook the fish in, but aim it towards the boat to actually catch it. You have a set timer, but if you collect any of the wrong fish, the timer goes down quick. These 2 challenges were pretty cool, and I enjoyed that they went back and added some new features to Donkey Kong Country. One cool thing about Funky in this game too is you can actually call him whenever. This Game Boy Advance version you can tell was highly inspired by Donkey Kong Country 2. As it added some things that weren't initially in Donkey Kong Country to make it feel more like Donkey Kong Country 2. Like for instance, the bonus levels have the big B on it. That would not appear until Donkey Kong Country 2. Then before each of the challenges, they added these little screens. Again, it wasn't a thing until Donkey Kong Country 2, but it is cool to see them added here because now you can actually see Donkey Kong in one of these. Overall, this version of the game to me feels like the original with all the added DLC that it never actually got. Nothing gets taken away here really, and it only adds to the game as a whole. So if you're a fan of Donkey Kong Country but always wanted to have a little bit more, I highly recommend this version of the game. I think the cutscenes are really fun and it looks great. Both ports do a solid job, but they still don't hold a candle to the original Super Nintendo release. The biggest reason I say that is because the downscale of the soundtrack, and if you don't have that soundtrack at full blast, you're missing out. Now, I want to talk about the last game of the day, which I mistakenly thought was another port of Donkey Kong Country, but really it was its own game.
He's the beast you loved on Super NES. And now we've captured him on Game Boy, in an all-new game with all new enemies and worlds. Donkey Kong Land, new for Game Boy and Super Game Boy.
Donkey Kong Land released in 1995 and took the mechanics and feel of Donkey Kong Country, but created something closer to a unique experience on the Game Boy. The gameplay itself is very similar, if not one-for-one a port of Donkey Kong Country, while changing some features, like for instance at the end of each level, you jump into some weird portal-type hole, and your checkpoints give you a big thumbs up. You can actually see your extra lives now, as they're actually hearts at the bottom of the screen. The maps of the game are completely different, however, from Donkey Kong Country. They added new enemies and bosses, for instance this bad boy on the cover, the Flying Pig. His name is Hogwash. The funniest thing I saw in this game is that you have Diddy and Donkey Kong like you do in all the other games, but just like Donkey Kong Country on the Game Boy Color, you can only see one at a time. And instead of being in a little barrel icon at the bottom of the screen, when you get Diddy or Donkey Kong, they burst out of their barrel and then they ascend into the heavens. To me, it was just always funny to see them spiral into the air and just fly off the screen, just waiting until it's their turn.
I have to go now. My planet needs me.
This game was also influenced by the sequel of Donkey Kong Country, Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy Kong's Quest. You can tell by the map layout of the pirate ships, which is a prominent stage type in Donkey Kong Country 2. At first I thought it was just a coincidence, until I found out both games came out in 1995, only a few months apart. But because of this, you actually get to see Donkey Kong climb 2 ropes just like Donkey Kong Jr. did. I don't recall this ever happening in Donkey Kong Country, so I thought I would just throw it in here. There's some big differences in maps between this one and Donkey Kong Country, as this one introduces like a city landscape, which I imagine is like a shout out to the King Kong origins. There's also these sky levels that remind me of something you would see in like a Kid Icarus game, featuring these platforms you ride on and can change direction every time you jump. There's some underwater levels again, but instead of just being the ocean, it's got these underground buildings that remind me of Atlantis or something. You do have your regular ocean ones too though. The game features 4 unique boss fights, including Giant Clam, Hard Hat, Wild Sting, and then finally a completely unique fight with King K. Rool. Honestly, the bosses in this game are very easy. I didn't struggle at all with the first 3. But when you get to King K. Rool though, instead of fighting on a pirate ship, you fight on top of a tower. The fight starts similar to the classic K. Rool fight, but then he jumps towards you and does an animation reminding me of his neutral air in Smash. I know I said that before, but this one really looks like his neutral air in Smash. Donkey Kong Land is no Ocarina of Time to Majora's Mask, but it has a similar feel as it uses the same animations and sprites while creating a unique game experience. If you are a huge Donkey Kong fan, I recommend you go and play it because you're missing out. It is definitely not as good as Donkey Kong Country, but it's still a fun, unique adventure with our boys, and that's what counts. Donkey Kong Country is one of the best ways to breathe life into an existing IP, turning Donkey Kong from a relic to a powerhouse of his own to rival Nintendo's other big IPs. I'm excited to get into the next video and go through Diddy Kong's Quest, as a lot of people say it's the best game in the series. I have always been a massive fan of Donkey Kong and Super Smash Bros. All the way back to being a kid playing Melee to now. I like to throw Smash tournaments up on in the background on my computer all the time, and I always stop to watch some high-level Donkey Kong. K. Rool being added to Ultimate 2 was such a great inclusion, he deserved to be there and fits right in with the rest of the cast. I don't want to go too into his moveset today though, because I know more and more moves appear as you go through this series. But that is going to do it for me today. I hope you enjoyed my dive into Rare and how we got this revitalization of Donkey Kong. If you liked the video, do me a favor and subscribe and follow me on this journey as I play every game every character in Super Smash Bros. Is from. I don't really have a huge goal with this channel right now, as I haven't been posting regularly, but I am going to get better about it, and I always like to hear people's personal journeys with a character in a game. There's a lot of people too who comment with things that I never even knew about with certain characters, and that's really cool. One thing I learned from doing my Pac-Man videos is that characters like Donkey Kong and Pac-Man have very strong, dedicated fan bases, which to me definitely shows that they deserve to be in a game like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which I view as like a Hall of Fame of gaming. To me, this is a fun adventure and I enjoy learning new things, and I hope you have fun learning some new stuff too today. I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.
Mortal Kombat on Sega Genesis is the best video game ever.
I disagree. It's a very good game, but I think Donkey Kong is the best game ever.
Donkey Kong sucks.
You know something? You suck.